Why did the Titanic, once hailed as the ship that could never sink, meet such a tragic end? And why, more than a century later, does it still rest untouched on the ocean floor? To find the answers, we must return to where it all began. In 1908, the British White Star Line invested $7.5 million to build the world's largest luxury ocean liner. Designer Thomas Andrews used more than 3 million rivets to assemble the 269-meter Titanic, equipped with 16 watertight compartments and advanced automatic doors. Even if 5 compartments flooded, the ship was expected to stay afloat. The world believed it was unsinkable, but to speed up construction, some hull rivets contained too much slack and invisible flaw that would later seal the ship's fate. On April 10, 1912, over 2,000 passengers boarded the massive 4,600-ton vessel as it departed England for New York. Just 4 days later, on the foggy night of April 14th, disaster approached silently. The lookout had no binoculars, forcing the crew to scan the dark sea with their bare eyes. By the time they spotted the towering iceberg ahead, it was already too late. The Titanic turned, but its enormous size worked against it. The hull scraped the iceberg, tearing open multiple compartments. Water rushed in. The unsinkable ship began to break apart. As chaos swept the decks, a heartbreaking order echoed through the night. Women and children first. Many men stepped aside, giving up their chance to live. Even more striking, many families refused to separate. Wives and children chose to stay behind with their loved ones, rather than board lifeboats alone. But not everyone faced death with courage. One Japanese passenger, Masabumi Hosono, disguised himself as a woman to secure a seat on a lifeboat. Though he survived, he returned home to public shame and condemnation, spending the rest of his life under the weight of dishonor. The disaster revealed humanity at its best and worst sacrifice: fear, love, and desperation. In the end, only about 700 people survived, more than 1,500 including billionaire John Jacob Astor were lost to the icy Atlantic. After the tragedy, people tried several times to raise the wreck. Every attempt failed. The reason? The Titanic lies 3,700 meters below the surface, where recovery is nearly impossible. Even today, the ship is so fragile that exposure to air would destroy it instantly. For experts, the only respectful choice is to let the Titanic remain where it is, a silent memorial reminding us that life makes no exceptions. And if survival means abandoning the ones we love, what meaning does life truly hold?
The Halifax explosion occurred on
Two cargo ships collide, and an entire coastal city is almost wiped off the map. This is the Halifax explosion, a blast so powerful it rivaled the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. On the morning of December 6, 1917, a Belgian relief ship and a French munitions vessel, loaded with nearly 5,000 tons of explosives, found themselves on a collision course in the harbor of Halifax, Canada. Both ships were in a hurry. Neither wanted to give way. By the time they finally realized the danger, the distance between them had shrunk to just 800 meters. Engines were cut immediately, but the momentum was already unstoppable. At the last second, the French ship swung hard to starboard, but it was too late. The impact wasn't catastrophic on its own, but the scrape of metal generated sparks that ignited fuel on the munitions ship. Within minutes, flames raced across the deck. Crowds gathered along the waterfront, curious and unaware of what was about to happen. Then, the unimaginable. The French ship detonated. The blast was equivalent to 2,900 tons of TNT. A shockwave tore through the city at over 3,000 kilometers per hour. A fireball reached 500 C, hot enough to vaporize anything nearby. A massive 18-meter tsunami surged into the harbor moments later. Buildings collapsed instantly. Windows shattered miles away. The city center was reduced to rubble. More than 1,600 people died on the spot. Over 9,000 were injured, and more than 20,000 residents were left homeless. Before the nuclear age, this was the deadliest man-made explosion in human history, a single moment that forever changed Halifax. What exactly was the Holocaust, and how did one nation's hatred turn into one of the darkest chapters in human history? The Holocaust was the systematic, state-sponsored genocide of 6 million Jews carried out by Nazi Germany and its collaborators during World War II. Its origins trace back to 1933, when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power. Driven by extreme anti-Semitism, the Nazis falsely blamed Jewish people for Germany's economic struggles and portrayed them as a threat to the so-called Aryan race. Once in control, the regime quickly moved from hateful rhetoric to oppressive policy. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 stripped Jews of citizenship and basic rights, marking a turning point that transformed discrimination into government-backed persecution. After World War II began in 1939, conditions worsened dramatically. Across German-occupied Europe, Jewish families were driven from their homes, forced into overcrowded ghettos, and subjected to starvation and disease. In 1941, Nazi leaders initiated what they called the Final Solution, a plan to eliminate Europe's Jewish population entirely. This led to the construction of extermination camps Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, and others designed for mass murder. Millions of Jews were killed in gas chambers, while countless others died from forced labor, starvation, and brutal medical experiments. Mass shootings and death marches added to the scale of the horror. The Nazis also targeted other groups they labeled undesirable, including Romani people, people with disabilities, Slavs, political dissidents, and LGBTQ individuals. By the time Allied forces liberated the camps in 1945, approximately 6 million Jews, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, had been murdered, along with an estimated 5 million non-Jewish victims. The Holocaust remains one of the most devastating atrocities in human history. The testimonies of survivors stand as powerful reminders of the dangers of hatred, unchecked extremism, and the consequences of allowing intolerance to grow unchecked. What really happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And why did the United States choose such a devastating path? To understand the turning point, we have to revisit the final, brutal months of the Pacific War, a time when Japan showed no intention of surrendering, and the US feared a land invasion would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, on Hiroshima, a major military and industrial center. Detonating at 8:15 a.m., the uranium-based bomb unleashed the force of 15 kilotons of TNT, instantly wiping out much of the city. Around 70,000 to 80,000 people died immediately. Fires, injuries, and radiation sickness pushed the death toll to over 140,000. By the end of 1945, the heat was unimaginable. Buildings vanished in the blast. Survivors suffered severe burns and long-term radiation-related illnesses, conditions that would affect families for generations. But the war still wasn't over. 3 days later, on August 9th, the US dropped a second bomb, this time the plutonium-powered Fat Man on Nagasaki, another city crucial to Japan's war industry. With a yield of about 21 kilotons, it was even more powerful, though the surrounding mountains absorbed part of the impact. Roughly 40,000 people were killed instantly, with total deaths reaching around 70,000 by year's end. This second strike pushed Japan to its breaking point. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender, officially ending World War II. But the bombings left far more than destroyed cities. They ignited global ethical debates over nuclear warfare, shaped the early tensions of the Cold War, and raised urgent questions about humanity's future. In total, over 200,000 lives were lost, and the physical and emotional scars remain deeply embedded in Japanese society. The suffering of survivors and the world's reckoning with nuclear power continues to influence conversations about war, peace, and the responsibility that comes with destructive technology.
The Texas City disaster.
Today, the Texas City disaster, what exactly went wrong? And how did a simple fire turn into one of the deadliest industrial accidents in US history? On the morning of April 16, 1947, the French cargo ship SS Grand Camp was docked in Texas City, loading ammonium nitrate fertilizer, a substance farmers rely on, but one that becomes dangerously explosive under the wrong conditions. Around a.m., workers noticed smoke rising from the cargo hold. Crew members tried to fight the fire, but it spread quickly. In a desperate attempt to contain it, the captain ordered the hatches sealed, hoping to cut off oxygen, but instead of smothering the flames, the trapped heat only made things worse. At the ammonium nitrate ignited, the ship erupted in a colossal explosion that instantly obliterated the Grand Camp. A massive mushroom cloud shot into the sky, and the shockwave rippled outward, so powerful that people reported hearing it more than 150 miles away. The blast leveled the docks, destroyed nearby buildings, and set off fires across surrounding oil refineries and chemical plants. Flaming debris, including huge pieces of the ship itself, rained down across the city, sparking even more fires. And the nightmare wasn't over. The next day, a second ship, the SS High Flyer, also carrying ammonium nitrate, exploded as well. The combined destruction left Texas City looking like a war zone. By the end, an estimated 581 people were dead, including firefighters, dock workers, and civilians who had gathered to watch the initial fire. More than 5,000 were injured, and thousands were left homeless. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, and the damage cost millions of dollars. The Texas City disaster remains a powerful reminder of how a single spark, paired with unstable materials, can unleash catastrophic consequences on an entire community. What happens when a single mistake turns an ordinary night into one of the deadliest industrial disasters in history? That unsettling question became reality during the night of December 2nd to 3rd, 1984, in Bhopal, India, when a silent chemical leak changed the lives of hundreds of thousands forever. The disaster began inside the Union Carbide pesticide plant, where a highly toxic chemical called methyl isocyanate beta, known as MIC, was stored in massive tanks. Years of poor maintenance, failing safety systems, and inadequate staff training had created a dangerous environment long before anything went wrong. Then, on that tragic night, water accidentally entered a tank containing roughly 42 tons of MIC. What followed was a runaway chemical reaction. Pressure soared, temperature spiked, and the tank's safety mechanisms, refrigeration units, scrubbers, and alarms failed or had been shut down to cut costs, with nothing left to stop it. A huge cloud of MIC and other poisonous gases burst from the plant and drifted across the nearby neighborhoods. Most residents were asleep. Many woke up choking, coughing, and unable to see as the gas burned their eyes and lungs. Panic swept through the densely packed slums surrounding the plant. People fled blindly into the streets, while hospitals rapidly filled with victims struggling to breathe. Within just a few hours, thousands were dead. Official reports estimated about 3,000 deaths in the first days. Latest studies suggest more than 15,000 people ultimately died from the immediate and long-term effects of the gas. Around 500,000 others were exposed, many suffering permanent health problems, chronic respiratory illness, blindness, neurological damage, and birth defects that affected generations. The Bhopal gas tragedy quickly became a global symbol of corporate negligence and regulatory failure. Union Carbide faced intense international criticism and years of legal battles. Yet for many survivors, justice has been painfully slow. Even decades later, countless families are still fighting for fair compensation, proper healthcare, and a lasting acknowledgement of the suffering they endured. What went wrong on that cold January morning? And how did a routine launch turn into one of NASA's darkest days? The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster happened on January 28, 1986, when the shuttle exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff, killing all 7 crew members. The launch at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida had been highly anticipated. Among the astronauts was Krista McAuliffe, a schoolteacher who was said to become the first civilian in space, a moment that millions of Americans were excited to witness. But the day took a devastating turn. The tragedy was ultimately caused by the failure of an O-ring, a rubber seal inside one of the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. Engineers had repeatedly warned that the unusually cold weather could prevent the O-ring from sealing properly. Overnight temperatures had dropped far below what the shuttle had been tested for. Ice covered the launch pad. The risks were obvious. Yet despite these warnings, NASA pressed forward. At 11:38 a.m., Challenger lifted off. For a brief moment, everything looked normal. But as the shuttle climbed, the compromised O-ring allowed hot gases to escape from the booster. Those flames burned through the adjacent external fuel tank, triggering a catastrophic structural failure. In seconds, Challenger tore apart in the sky. Millions of Americans watched the explosion live on television. What had been a moment of national excitement instantly transformed into shock and heartbreak. The crew cabin separated from the shuttle and fell into the Atlantic Ocean. While the exact moment of the crew's death remains uncertain, investigators believe the astronauts survived the initial breakup but were unable to withstand the violent impact with the sea. The Challenger disaster changed NASA forever. It exposed serious organizational flaws, led to sweeping safety reforms, and reshaped how the nation viewed space exploration. A mission meant to inspire a generation instead became a tragic reminder of the price of ignoring warnings and the fragile line between triumph and disaster. What exactly happened at Chernobyl? How did a routine safety test turn into one of the worst nuclear disasters in human history? On April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, A late-night safety test on reactor number 4 took a disastrous turn. The test was supposed to simulate a power outage and check whether the reactor's emergency systems would respond correctly. But that night, several things went wrong. A dangerous mix of operator mistakes and serious design flaws pushed the reactor into instability. When the power output unexpectedly dropped close to zero, the operators tried to bring it back up fast. In the process, they disabled key safety systems, leaving the reactor essentially unprotected. Then came the turning point. A sudden surge in power triggered a massive explosion inside the reactor core. The blast tore the roof of the building and sent huge amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Fires erupted immediately. Radioactive clouds drifted across Europe, with Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia taking the hardest hit. 2 workers died instantly. In the following days, 28 firefighters and emergency responders who rushed in without knowing how much radiation they were facing died from acute radiation sickness. Their bravery helped contain the disaster, but the cost was enormous. Officially, around 50 deaths were directly linked to the explosion and immediate radiation exposure, but the long-term consequences were far worse. More than 100,000 residents were evacuated as entire towns were abandoned. The Chernobyl exclusion zone remains largely uninhabited even today. Long-term radiation exposure has been tied to thousands of cancer cases, especially thyroid cancer, along with other severe health issues. Depending on the study, experts estimate that the eventual death toll could range from about 4,000 to tens of thousands. Over the coming decades, Chernobyl wasn't just a catastrophic accident. It was a turning point that changed global nuclear policy, reshaped public trust, and left behind one of the most haunting reminders of what can happen when technology, design flaws, and human error collide.
Deadliest school shootings in the United States history took place on April 20th, 1999 in Littleton, Colorado. 2 senior students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, carried out a carefully planned attack that shocked the nation. Harris and Klebold had been planning the attack for over a year, amassing firearms, homemade bombs, and ammunition. On the morning of the attack, they planted bombs in the school's cafeteria, intending for them to explode and cause mass casualties. When the bombs failed to detonate, they entered the school armed with semi-automatic weapons and began shooting indiscriminately. The attack started at approximately 11:19 a.m. as Harris and Klebold opened fire on students outside the school before moving inside. They roamed the halls and library, shooting at anyone they encountered, laughing and taunting their victims. The pair also engaged in a brief gunfight with the police, who had quickly arrived on the scene. The shooting spree lasted about 47 minutes, after which Harris and Klebold retreated to the library and committed suicide. In total, 12 students and 1 teacher were killed, and 21 others were injured by gunfire. Many more suffered from psychological trauma, and the Columbine shooting had a profound impact on the United States, leading to debates on gun control, school security, and the influence of violent media. It also sparked changes in how law enforcement responds to active shooter situations, and many survivors of this tragedy continue to advocate for stronger measures to prevent similar disasters.
Safety and the influence of violent media. It also transformed law enforcement strategies for active shooter situations. Today, many survivors continue to advocate for stronger measures to prevent similar disasters, ensuring the memory of those lost shapes the future. What really happened on September 11th, 2001, and how did a single morning change the entire world? That day began like any other, but within hours the United States faced one of the deadliest coordinated terrorist attacks in its history. At 8 o'clock a.m., the Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. Minutes later, American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767, slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. 17 minutes after that, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower, igniting massive fires and sending shockwaves across the nation. The assault didn't stop there. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, tearing through one of the most secure buildings in the world. Meanwhile, passengers aboard United Airlines Flight 93 learned about the earlier attacks and heroically fought back. Their struggle forced the plane down in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, preventing an attack on either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. By 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. The North Tower followed at 10:28 a.m., destroying surrounding buildings and leaving Lower Manhattan covered in debris and chaos. In total, 2,977 people were killed, passengers and crew from 4 flights, workers and first responders at the World Trade Center, and staff inside the Pentagon. Thousands more were injured. The The aftermath reshaped global security, transformed US foreign policy, and launched the war on terror, including the invasion of Afghanistan. This single morning didn't just mark a national tragedy, it changed the course of the 21st century. What happens when human error meets natural forces on a massive scale? On April 20, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico became the epicenter of one of the worst environmental disasters in US history. Owned by Transocean and leased by BP, the rig was located about 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana, drilling an exploratory well. A surge of natural gas blasted through a recently placed concrete seal, traveling up the drilling pipe and igniting. The result was a massive explosion that killed 11 workers and injured 17 more. The rig burned for 2 days before sinking into the Gulf. The tragedy didn't end there. The damaged wellhead continued to leak oil for 87 days before it was successfully capped. By then, an estimated 210 million gallons of crude oil had poured into the Gulf of Mexico, devastating marine ecosystems, polluting coastlines across 5 states, and threatening wildlife. The region's fishing and tourism industries suffered huge economic losses. In response, BP and the US government launched an unprecedented cleanup effort, including skimming, controlled burns, and chemical dispersants. Legal battles followed, and BP ultimately paid billions in fines, penalties, and settlements. The Deepwater Horizon disaster remains a stark reminder of the risks of deepwater drilling and the fragility of our oceans. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. On March 11, 2011, Japan faced one of its darkest days. A massive 9.0 magnitude earthquake, the strongest ever recorded in the country, struck off the coast, unleashing towering tsunami waves, some as high as 40 meters. These waves slammed into the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Fukushima Prefecture, operated by Tokyo Electric Power Company. The tsunami flooded the plant, cutting off its power and crippling its critical cooling systems. Without cooling, the reactors overheated, triggering 3 nuclear meltdowns. In the following days, hydrogen gas built up inside the reactor buildings, causing explosions that released radioactive materials into the air. The surrounding region became heavily contaminated, forcing over 150,000 people to evacuate. Remarkably, there were no immediate deaths from radiation exposure. However, the disaster's long-term health effects are still being studied. Indirectly, stress and displacement took a toll, especially among the elderly, with estimates suggesting around 16 deaths linked to evacuation-related causes. Radioactive contamination also affected land, water, and food supplies, prompting the government to establish a 20-kilometer exclusion zone around the plant. The cleanup is ongoing and expected to take decades. Decontaminating the reactors and safely storing radioactive waste remain massive challenges. Globally, Fukushima sparked intense scrutiny of nuclear safety, leading many countries to shut down reactors and revise safety protocols. In Japan, the disaster shattered public confidence in nuclear energy, temporarily shutting down all nuclear plants and reshaping the nation's energy policy. What drives a community to its breaking point? On December 14, 2012, Newtown, Connecticut, faced an unimaginable tragedy: the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, one of the deadliest mass shootings in US history. The day began with Adam Lanza, a 20-year-old local resident, killing his mother at home, armed with an assault rifle and other firearms. He then drove to Sandy Hook Elementary. Lanza forced his way into the school by shooting through a glass window near the entrance. Once inside, in just 5 minutes, he murdered 20 children, aged 6 and 7, and 6 staff members, including teachers and the principal, who tried to protect their students. Amid the chaos, some children and teachers hid, preventing even more loss of life. The massacre ended when Lanza took his own life as police arrived. The attack sent shockwaves nationwide, sparking intense debates over gun control, school safety, and emergency preparedness. President Barack Obama and other leaders called for stricter gun laws, including universal background checks and assault weapon bans. But comprehensive federal legislation stalled. Some states acted independently, tightening gun laws. Yet the national debate continues. Sandy Hook changed how schools approach security and emergency planning. Victims are remembered each year, and the Sandy Hook Promise Foundation was established to advocate for gun violence prevention and safer communities. The tragedy remains a haunting reminder of the urgent need for action to protect children and prevent such horrors from happening again. What happens when a peaceful city is shattered in seconds? On April 15, 2013, the Boston Marathon became the scene of a horrifying attack. 2 homemade bombs detonated near the finish line, sending shockwaves through the crowd. Made from pressure cookers packed with shrapnel, the explosions occurred just 12 seconds apart, killing 3 people and injuring more than 260. Many victims suffered severe injuries, and some required amputations. The perpetrators were later identified as 2 brothers of Chechen descent who had lived in the United States for years. Their act of terror set off one of the largest manhunts in recent American history. Law enforcement, including the FBI and Boston police, worked tirelessly to track them down. A breakthrough came on April 18 when the brothers killed a police officer during their attempt to escape. They then carjacked a vehicle, leading police on a high-speed chase and ending in a shootout in Watertown, a Boston suburb. 1 brother was killed, while the other managed to flee. The city went into lockdown, and on April 19th, the surviving brother was discovered hiding in a boat in a backyard in Watertown. He was arrested, later convicted on multiple charges, including using a weapon of mass destruction, and sentenced to death. The Boston Marathon bombing shocked the nation, highlighting the threat of domestic terrorism. In its aftermath, security at major public events across the United States was dramatically increased, reshaping how Americans think about safety in public spaces. Have you ever wondered how one night could change a city forever? On October 2017, Las Vegas experienced one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. The Route 91 Harvest Festival, a lively country music event on the Las Vegas Strip with over 22,000 attendees, turned into a nightmare. A 64-year-old man from Nevada opened fire from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. He had checked in days earlier, bringing with him 23 firearms, many fitted with bump stocks, which let semi-automatic guns fire faster. At around 10:05 p.m., during Jason Aldean's performance, he began shooting into the crowd below, unleashing more than 1,000 rounds in roughly 10 minutes. Panic erupted as concertgoers fled for their lives. By the end, 58 people were killed and over 850 injured, either by gunfire or in the chaos. Authorities and the FBI conducted extensive investigations, but the shooter left no manifesto or explanation, and his motive remains unknown. He ultimately took his own life before law enforcement reached his hotel room. The attack reignited debates over gun control, especially the use of bump stocks, which were later banned in 2018. In the aftermath, the Las Vegas community rallied around the motto Vegas Strong, supporting victims, families, and survivors of the tragedy. This horrific event reminds us how fragile life can be, and how communities can unite even after unimaginable loss. Thank you for watching. If you learned something new, leave a like, comment on which historical events you want to explore next, and subscribe to keep learning.